The insight that the Buddha got at the foot of the Bodhi tree is the kind of insight that helped him to be liberated from all fear, anger, despair. And that insight, you have to get it directly and not through explanation. Because when you explain, you offer notions and concepts. But notions and concepts can never be the reality. Suppose there is someone who has never eaten a fruit called kiwi. And you try to tell him how is the taste of the kiwi fruit. No matter how many notions and concepts you have, it's impossible for him to get the true taste of kiwi. So, true insight is like that. Prajna, insight, like that. You can speak about insight, but we are using notions and concepts. We can make good use of notions and concepts in order to practice deep looking. Deep looking is meditation. And we can get the insight by ourselves. Insight cannot be given us by another person. If you don't eat the kiwi, well, you cannot understand, you cannot experience the true taste of kiwi. You only have a notion. That kind of insight from time to time is called right view in Buddhism. And right view make up one of the 8 elements of the noble path presented by the Buddha. There is a path leading to liberation and true happiness. Is called the Noble Eightfold Path. And we have learned about right mindfulness, which is one element, right concentration, which is another element of true path. And when we speak of right view, that is another element of the path. And after that we have right thinking, right speech, right action, right diligence we have learned, and right livelihood. And the 5 mindfulness trainings that many of us received today, this morning, is a very concrete expression of that path. The path of right view, right thinking, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right diligence, right mindfulness, and concentration.
Yesterday in the late afternoon, we took my children to the Bronx Zoo to see the holiday lights. If you've never seen it, it's a delightful spectacle of 3-dimensional wire and material animals lit and sometimes moving by means of animatronics. And there's a s'mores making area with fire pits and so much cocoa, and holiday music piped through speakers all around the zoo. In the square of the old original zoo, they have LEDs strung in the shapes of trees, and the lights dance. One of my favorite spots was I was calling the Rainbow Road, where it's just strings of lights in arches, back to back to back to back, which create this just walkway on the way from the old zoo to the new areas. And the lights change color and turn on and off in patterns that are a wonderment as you stand under them. The evening was mild, the rain held off. We got to watch an ice sculpture being made. I got some good pictures of my family. And there was so much grumbling and smacking each other, not the grown-ups, the children, and complaining and one full meltdown, and it wasn't me. And I had to give the same instructions over and over again and answer the same questions over and over again. And by the end, I felt like if I heard the word mom one more time, I was going to scream. I tried so hard to be present and to be patient and to be in the moment. And honestly, I just kept feeling like, This is not how this is supposed to be. This was supposed to be fun and joyful, and we were supposed to make memories. And I kept feeling like, in the moment, I just kept feeling, why can't I be more patient? Why don't I have more control in my parenting? Why is it so hard? And of course, then I was like, quit getting down on yourself, quit getting down on the kids, quit getting down on the experience. And I share this because so often, especially these days with social media being what it is, we focus on, we share, we show the good, and we forget to share with each other the bad, the miserable, the torturous, and maybe especially when it comes to parenting. We highlight the perfect. Like if I shared on Facebook only that one precious picture of my guys roasting marshmallows, and we leave out all the struggly parts. But it turns out there's a lot of damn struggle, and a lot that comes from real and unchangeable pain and hardship, but also a lot that is of society's making when it tells us what we should be and how things should go. And a lot is of our own making when we get stuck in those loops, when we come down on ourselves and on our people and on our lives for not meeting some vision of what should be. I think often of the Maggie Smith poem, Good Bones, that I've shared here before, and one line in particular where she writes, "The world is at least 50% terrible, and that's a conservative estimate, though I keep this from my children." I'm not so sure the children don't know. As I watch my own grow, moving through youthful experiences I am too far removed from to remember with perfect clarity, I realize that I am not recalling my own childhood inaccurately when I recall a deep understanding of melancholy, of nostalgia, of pain and uncertainty about whether or not life is worth it. Most children know more than we realize that life involves struggle and angst and frustration and fear. And as we grow, we can either mask it, hide it behind shoulds and filtered photos, or we can learn to be real about it and share it and walk vulnerably into the fray and declare that yes, life maybe is 50% terrible. A few days ago, Buddhists around the world marked the day known as Bodhi Day. It celebrates the Buddha's attainment of enlightenment under the Bodhi tree. From it, we derive the words bodhicitta, the mind of love and enlightenment that strives toward awakening. It's the mind that talk from Thich Nhat Hanh speaks about if you watch the larger video. And the word bodhisattva, which is this term that primarily refers to folks who are on the path to enlightenment, who are cultivating bodhicitta to contribute to the betterment of the world. Now, I am not a Buddhist, but I often think about the Buddha when I find myself struggling with patience or facing a great deal of shoulds inside my own mind. I'm sure that many of you know the story, but just as the story of the miracle of Hanukkah bears repeating, and just as we repeat the story of Christmas each year, and just as we remind ourselves year over year about the workings of this earth as the winter solstice approaches, so too the story of the Buddha can be told and retold, even to those of us who've heard it before. So, over 2,500 years ago, a prince was born, and his parents named him Siddhartha Gautama. He was wealthy and privileged. There are different versions, of course, of the story of his life, as there are for any great person. I share with you one variant this morning. So in this version, Siddhartha's father sees a holy man who predicts that his son will either become a great king or a great holy man. And the father, wanting his son to follow in his kingly footsteps, declares that Siddhartha will know only joy and pleasure, and he keeps his son enclosed within the palace walls. So everything Siddhartha could want was provided to him, his needs and desires met, luxury and beauty all around. But one day he decided to leave the safety of the palace to see what the world was like. The prince found a way beyond the walls that had been built around him. And when he journeyed forth, he saw for the first time what life brings. He saw an old man, a sick one, a dead body, and a religious ascetic. Upon seeing these, Gautama's life is turned upside down. He's so disturbed by these encounters with real life, with what awaits all of us, that he completely changes his own life. At first, he becomes a monk, but this doesn't seem to help him understand living and dying. He doesn't find the truth and meaning he's seeking. So then he becomes an ascetic, someone who lives a life of total austerity in complete opposition to the life he'd lived before, gives away everything and embraces a life of abject poverty, nearly killing himself in the process. But in this too, he finds not the meaning and truth he seeks. He goes on to find other teachers and try other methods that other people tell him will help him understand human existence and the meaning of suffering. He listens to others' notions and concepts, and nothing seems to work. He can't find the answer to the nature or meaning of life anywhere, no answer that will satisfy this new awareness he has of the way that humans suffer. After all this seeking and trying different things and failing to find the understanding that he wants, he sits himself down under a Bodhi tree, which is like a fig tree, in the town of Bodh Gaya, and he sits there under this tree, waiting for understanding to come. It's not a passive waiting. As he sits, he meditates and he focuses on achieving understanding, but it is an unhurried seeking, an attachmentless waiting. And as he sits, he encounters demons, and he summons strength from deep within that allows him to continue his waiting search. In the end, as we know, Siddhartha Gautama finds enlightenment and comes to see that no extremes make sense. Under the tree, he fully actualizes his bodhicitta and becomes the Buddha. In this enlightenment, he realizes the truth of what he calls the middle way, the truth that somewhere between utter poverty and obscene luxury is the way forward. He realizes that a life of letting go of extremes, of detaching from the impermanent trappings of life, is the key to feeling at peace in a world that is at least 50% terrible. In his enlightenment, he finds that he no longer suffers from the pain caused by attachment to the transient things of this world, like health, wealth, and more. The middle way that Gautama proposes, and that millions have practiced since that day under the tree millennia ago, has at its core the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path. Now, those Four Noble Truths are, first, dukkha, which is the idea that suffering is present in all life. Now, when I first was taught this in a religious studies class, we learned it as all life is suffering. Maybe you've heard it that way. But it's more nuanced than that sounds. The First Noble Truth is not a statement about the unchanging nature of all human life. Rather, it's an acknowledgement that suffering is present within all life, is possible, which is an undeniable fact. The second noble truth is Samudaya, which is the idea that suffering occurs because we cling to and desire things and a vision of ourselves. So the point here is that the suffering mentioned in the first noble truth has an origin point. Death wouldn't lead to suffering if we weren't attached to life and to each other. But this second noble truth also speaks to those shoulds, those visions we hold for how things ought to be, and that cause us pain when things aren't that way. Nirodha is the third noble truth, and it's the idea that suffering can be escaped. It's not static and unchanging, it can be overcome. And that doesn't mean we stop caring or stop having feelings or stop loving ourselves or each other. It means stop accepting all those shoulds, those grand visions of perfection. Stop thinking that the only way to be happy is to acquire and to achieve and to become. And then the final noble truth, Magga, is the idea that the Eightfold Path is the means to ceasing that desire and attachment and ending that suffering. And so then that Eightfold Path were those words that Thich Nhat Hanh mentioned at the end of that piece. They're instructions on the way to live: right view, right resolve, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration. Ultimately, all these instruct not on cultivating wealth or on asceticism, not on any extreme, but on cultivating compassion and peace, harmony and gentleness, on cultivating focus and awareness, a commitment to moral and ethical behavior in the world. Through the practice of these behaviors and a deep understanding of the interconnections of all things, one stops feeling attachments to outcomes and means, and one can end suffering, thus achieving enlightenment. Buddhism teaches, through the life of the Buddha, through the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path to Enlightenment, a letting go. It teaches a release of our own belief in the permanent, a letting go of our self-delusion that we have control, and that the things we believe must always continue, must indeed always continue. It teaches a kind of nimbleness of being that neither denies nor idolizes the trappings of human society and the human constructs around which so many of us build our lives. Buddhism teaches this way because Buddhism recognizes the fundamental impermanence of our human existence and understands our attachment to these impermanent things to be the root of suffering. Recognizes the world we live in, but actually just asks us to live in it more openly, more honestly, more compassionately, and more calmly, in spite of the challenges. We're asked to live without pretense, without judgment, without shoulds, but with patience and courage and realness in this moment. That's something that I come back to again and again when I think of the story. The patience and courage and commitment embodied in the Buddha. How many of us would give up a life of luxury in pursuit of truth and meaning? How many of us would truly make enlightenment, understanding, not knowledge, but truth, our lodestar, our guidepost? How many of us, upon failing time and time again, would give it just one more go sitting under a tree and meditating on the human condition? How many of us would commit ourselves so fully, so completely to wisdom and freedom and depth that we would sit under that tree day after day, experiencing all manner of physical and psychological discomfort? How many of us would look the challenges of being human in the face and rather than running away, sit and confront them until we made sense of them? And I'm not saying we should. There's no shoulds allowed today. I'm just marveling that what the Buddha did required a kind of studied and unhurried focus and dedication. He had to be gentle with himself because he kept failing. He had to be compassionate with the people around him whose journeys were different, or whose commitments were different, whose teachings didn't serve him. He had to have conviction that would not shake even in the face of demons. He had to be bold enough to sit with the very realities that shook the foundation of his life instead of pushing them away. He had to let go of the notions and concepts imparted to him by others and taste the kiwi fruit for himself, however long that took. That piece, that letting go of a timeline, letting go of an outcome, letting go of a vision of ourselves that must be in order for us to be happy, is hard work. Last year, in an interview on NPR about Bodhi Day, Takashi Miyagi, a professor at the Institute of Buddhist Studies and a minister at the Southern Alameda County Buddhist Church, had this to say. He said, "For me, what Buddhism teaches me is that we are indeed imperfect people. You know, that we do try our best, but we fall short at a lot of times. And the key, though, is to understand and to not beat yourself up and to be depressed over this, but rather be embraced within this true reality. There's no judgment." When I first read that, it stood in such deep contrast for me with what our culture typically asks of us: perfection, rationality, the ability to grasp concepts and notions and to understand them completely. We inherit that, at least in part, from that period of Western culture known as the Enlightenment, a nice contrast of word. It was a massively important turn in philosophy, religion, governance, and it was one that privileged knowledge, reason, the human mind, the individual, and also privileged the new ideas and radical thoughts that came from those individual human minds. It was really good in a lot of ways. It laid the groundwork for revolutions and for religious shifts, including some that factored strongly into the development of our own Unitarian Universalism. Some of those American shifts, like Unitarianism and Transcendentalism, were also among the early adopters of a form of Buddhism that they imported and adapted based on the basic translations to which they had access and based on their own needs and context. These days, direct teaching is much more possible. Translations with nuance and depth are prevalent, and an awareness of how our own culture impacts our understanding of another is more commonplace. And as a result, I know that many of you know this. Buddhist practices and teachings are integral to the spiritual lives of many Unitarian Universalists. Techniques of meditation, a grasp of non-attachment, and a commitment to a kind of loving kindness that encompasses all beings, even ourselves, are some of the meaningful aspects of Buddhism that many of you have shared with me. And with those, I think we can also place this idea of being imperfect people, people who try and fail, people who make enlightenment and truth their lodestar, but who fall short, people who attempt loving kindness and compassion and patience and fortitude, but who stumble on that path, who swerve to the extremes sometimes, and who need to be brought gently back to that middle way, sometimes by ourselves, sometimes by others, always with care and attention. The Buddha came to understand the truth of being human, and he strove for enlightenment, but not in the way of striving we understand most readily, not in the Western cultural way of striving. He strove not with aggression and speed and particular desired outcomes. He strove by sitting, with intention, with calm, with patience. It wasn't easy, but the alternative was to not sit. It was a life of suffering, aware that something was missing, aware that something more could be achieved. He couldn't not sit. And as he faced all the demons of his own making and those imposed from the outside, he found his way, a way that has led millions to strive, to sit, to find their own direct experience, to eat the kiwi fruit for themselves. When I think about last night and all the struggles of our outing, I am reminded that the only way out is often through. The only way to grow up is to grow up and experience the loss and pain that comes with that. The only way to grow our patience, to deepen our understanding of others, to find enlightenment and grasp the truth is to just keep living, keep trying, keep forgiving, keep being gentle, keep reflecting, keep letting go. In spite of mistakes, in spite of roadblocks, deeply held false narratives, and wild misunderstandings. It turns out we humans have an unbelievable tenacity and an unbelievable capacity for change. In the face of suffering, we can light a candle, we can offer kindness, we can adapt, we can love, we can find and make meaning. We can grow our loving and enlightenment-seeking minds over and over again. After so many frustrations and heartbreaks, we can just keep striving. And so may this season offer you many opportunities to exercise patience and courage and loving kindness and to fail at them. May it offer you opportunities to be gentle with yourselves and with others. And may you know the miracle of deepening truth on the path to enlightenment. So may it be.